Well, hi, Xander. I was just saying, I'll send you the video when we're done. But now we're live.
Hello.
And also, Xander and I were just talking about lighting, and I should mention, Xander, your beard might absorb some of the lighting that's coming in as well, and that maybe doesn't help or reflects too much.
Well, then everybody can just, check out its magnificence.
That's absolutely right. Is that a COVID beard or is that an always beard?
This is I don't own a shaver. I go to the barbershop every 3 weeks for a trim beard.
Okay.
And it's what's called a virgin beard, which for people who don't know what that means is I've never shaven my beard off, not once since I started testosterone. I've been growing a beard for 16 years and my face has never been clean shaven since my beard started to sprout out. So it's a virgin beard.
Holy cow. Well, congratulations on your virgin beard.
I'm very proud of it. I get a lot of compliments from men in public, acting like, "Oh, dude, I love your beard."
That's nice.
It is.
So anyways, hello and welcome. I have to say this is my first show back. I stopped in around May. Things were picking up too much with school, with my kids and getting ready for end of year exams and stuff. And my son struggles with anxiety, so he was really having a hard time. So I sort of let the show go for a bit, took the summer off, and I am back with a bang. And I'm so happy to be here. And I'm also equally incredibly frustrated. And I encourage you to go onto my YouTube channel. I just put a rant on there from last week of me after I spent a few days in different residences, how frustrated I am continually with the care and support of our seniors, everything from the way residents look, like literally the physical buildings, they're so hospital-like and sterile, to the services, to the people ignoring people passed out and uncomfortable, not passed out, asleep in uncomfortable positions in chairs, and it goes on and on. Anyways, I encourage you to check that out because that was on the heels of coming back from vacation. But now I'm going to try and stay very positive, and I'm really happy to highlight this community today. I find that there are different communities that I find are marginalized. There's not a lot of light. There's not a lot of discussion about what's going on in these communities. Caregiving communities, individuals, and issues vary, right? Caregivers have lots of struggles, lots of challenges. There's also some really amazing and beautiful things about caregiving too, but there are some challenges and different groups struggle with different types of challenges. And today we're going to talk about the LGBTQ community. And I'm so happy, Xander, this is Xander Keeg, he's here. This guy is like social worker extraordinaire. He won in 2020 NASW Social Worker of the Year. That's the National Association of Social Workers. That's like our largest organization in the States. This guy won Social Worker of the Year. So top of the line, and congratulations on your reward.
Thank you.
Xander also has his BA in Speech and Interpersonal Communications and a master's not only in social work, but in conflict analysis and resolution. Do you breathe? Do you have time to breathe with all of these degrees?
Well, I tried to take a breather, but then I got a master's in theology. So, but let's be fully transparent. I'm a high school dropout who was in special education. So I feel like I made up for my poor school experience in my earlier life. Once I turned 30 is when I went to college. So I'm a late bloomer educationally.
And isn't that wonderful too, to just show what we can do and how we should not have self-imposed or other people imposing limitations on us, that regardless of how people see us when we're younger and unfortunately so vulnerable, especially in school, with the teachers and all the influence of peers and things like that in the system, that things can change for you. So hang in there. Not that I have a lot of young kids watching, but even as an adult, hang in there. You can continue to achieve whatever it is you want. So,
well, and for parents, right? For parents who have kids that are struggling,
yeah,
don't give up. That's what I say to people. Don't give up on them.
Yeah.
People give up on me, but not everybody, thankfully. But a lot of people did, and I made it through that. So your kids can make it through as well. You stick with them.
Absolutely. So Xander, we're going to talk about the LGBTQ community and caregiving, but I know that you yourself have been a caregiver, and that's what started your journey into helping this community combined with some other, I'm sure, experiences in your life. Talk to me first about the type of caregiving you did and who it was for.
Sure. Well, my father has dementia, and you know, what I say to people is that it was unexpected because everybody in my family, at least on my paternal side, they died of heart attacks in their 40s. So nobody ever lived old enough, you know, long enough for dementia symptoms at least to be recognizable, even if they had early onset. And so it came out of nowhere, really. It was unexpected. And my mother died in 2000. I don't have any siblings from my father. And so it was all on me to figure out, you know, how to take care of my dad. And even though I'm a social worker, I had never worked in geriatric psych or excuse me, social work. I had never worked in hospice or palliative care or oncology, but I had never worked in those kinds of environments. I was a clinical case manager with the homeless with the VA and then with transgender service members with the Navy. And so my bulk of my career as a social worker has not been anywhere near dementia. And so I wasn't really looking for it since I didn't expect it. And so I was taken off guard because my wife and I moved to Florida, and my father said he was going to come with us, and he offered to move in with us and become like he called it, I'll be your butler. So he was going to like clean the house, do the laundry, do the grocery shopping. And I was
Sounds
like,
ideal.
that's great, Dad. You know, you can live with us and you can do everything. And within about 1 week of my father living with us, I realized something is wrong with my dad. My father wasn't functioning to the level that I had come to expect, right? And so I got him over to the VA and assessed, and that's when he was diagnosed, at least preliminarily, with dementia. This was
Let me
about
just
a year
stop you
before
right.
COVID. So
Let me start you right there, Xander, because I just want to expand on one piece. You said it was unexpected, right? That this happened because a lot of your family died so young that you didn't see these symptoms. But I just want to point out that even when you see it within families, and all the caregivers will tell me this, well, it was on my mind. My mom had Alzheimer's, or my grandma did, and I was wondering if my mom would. But in a caregiver's shoes, it always feels kind of unexpected and thrown at them. You know, like they might always be in their back of their mind, but when the moment that it hits you and say, oh, wow, we have an issue here, it still feels like I wasn't ready for this. I didn't expect this to happen so soon.
yeah.
I'm not prepared, you know?
Okay, well, that helps. I mean, for me, I'm already past that beginning stage, but I think where that comes into play is there's so much isolation as a caregiver. And so just to know, like, even if I would have known, like, everyone pretty much is caught off guard. I thought it was unique to people like in my situation where there was no family history. So in some ways, I feel more connected, you know, in hindsight, of course, but still it takes away some of that feeling of isolation.
Yeah, and we're going to get to
Yeah.
isolation because I think that's something that's really felt by the LGBTQ community just in general anyways, like as an isolated group having their own unique issues combining with caregiving. So we'll get to
Yes.
isolation in a minute. The other thing I wanted to just comment on that you said was, you know, I'm a social worker and I've done this training, but I didn't have this training. But I'll tell you, it doesn't even that, like, I'm a social worker, my specialty is dementia, and now my father-in-law or my stepfather, we're seeing signs and symptoms, and he's going to the doctor, and the doctor has said mild cognitive impairment. I completely disagree. I think it's dementia, and the doctor's just not willing to say it yet. But it's me, it's my stepfather, but it still feels like I'm unprepared. I don't know what I'm doing. How am I going to advise my mother? Meanwhile, I've been like an expert in the field for 16 years. So it's like when it's our own family, all of our training kind of goes out the window because you feel it in a different place in your heart, right? So here your dad moves in, and I mean, even though you hadn't had that experience, it's like it's very personal. This is your dad. So he moved in, and is he still living with you, or has he moved out?
No, he lived with us for 18 months.
Wow.
And so I was, you know, getting him connected to all of the services that the Department of Veterans Affairs provides for veterans around caregiving and around, well, adult care, right? Adult daycare, medical respite, home health services. They have a lot of really great services that I was able to plug him into. But when COVID hit and the lockdown happened, his adult daycare program shut down. And my wife and I were both sent home to work. My wife is a marriage and family therapist. And at the time, I was working at a community-based clinic doing psychotherapy with military families. And so we were in the house. And we just didn't have, I mean, I don't know how individuals did it who had all of a sudden their kids were home from school, and it felt like wrangling a 79 at the time, he's 80 now, year-old toddler, while we were trying to work, and we needed confidentiality and privacy, and we needed quiet, and everything we moved into an apartment complex where my dad could go and do his own thing, go to the gym, go to the community center, go down to the lobby and have some coffee. And they shut all of that down. So my dad was just like in the apartment, and it wasn't going to work. So we put him into medical respite, which was just supposed to be for 2 weeks, right? Flatten the curve, 2 weeks. And then that became 6 weeks. And then ultimately, he went into assisted living, starting in the Independent Plus program. And after about 4 months, moving into assisted living. And that's just because of the isolation he was experiencing. He decompensated pretty rapidly. It's very sad to watch that. I've heard it from many caregivers and care partners now that that isolation, especially during the first few months of COVID, the decompensation on the part of their loved one has been pretty damaging to their health, and then also to the relationship they have with their caregiver and their care partner, not being able to recognize us, things like that. So
yeah, I mean, we could go on and on about the impact that COVID had and continues to have.
So he's been in assisted living now since.
So let me ask you, Xander. Let me ask you, because I want to make sure that we have time to talk about the LGBTQ community. And so your interest in caregiving has come from your personal experience, obviously, in caring for your father who has dementia and is now in an assisted residence. But talk to me about your interest in the LGBTQ community and where that passion began, and then how those two sort of married together, the caregiving and the LGBTQ.
I'd say my origins in LGBT community began probably around 13 or 14 when I discovered and disclosed to my mother that I was a young lesbian. So I'm a trans man. So I'm 55 now. So I've been a member of the community for many, many years, a few decades now. And so I was part of lesbian community until age 30 approximately. Somewhere between age 30 and 39, I started to change a bit about how I identified, using more of a trans identity label without actually physically transitioning to live in the world as a man. That started when I was age 39. So I've been a part of this community continuously while living in multiple states around the country. So that's how I got involved, was because I'm a member of the community. I've also been involved in the sense that I've co-founded organizations. I've started grassroots organizations, or at least chapters of them. Like back in the 90s, I was a chapter leader for Lesbian Avengers and Queer Nation, so more on the radical side in my younger years. And I just don't have the bandwidth for that kind of energy anymore.
As we get older, those things go. Well, first of all, Xander, thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't know that about you, so I appreciate your transparency and honesty. That's super helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of people to hear. And congratulations to you for becoming your true self and living your true life. So proud of you for that. Don't know you, but I'm always proud when I see people living their life as they want to. So I think that's just fantastic. In terms of caregiving and the LGBTQ community, where did that match happen? Obviously, I understand why you're passionate about that community, and you've been serving within that community for a long time. But when did it transition into helping caregivers?
Well, it was a very utilitarian happening. So I was looking for assistance with finding lawyers to help me do all of the paperwork that's necessary when you become a family caregiver, and you're the only person, right? The power of attorney for medical decision-making and legal decision-making and financial and property and all these different things that we have to think about. And so I put out a call, and I was connected to some other social workers on LinkedIn. And it was through LinkedIn that I met Jennifer Henyas, who is a former VA social worker like myself and has worked in the caregiver space for a number of years. It was instrumental in getting the caregiver program at the Department of Veterans Affairs really up and running and as robust as it is. And so we connected through LinkedIn, and we're both caregivers, we're both social workers, we're both interested in LGBT community. And so we came together, and Jennifer runs something called the Caregiver Wellness Collective. The Caregiver Wellness Collective has a program called Yoga for Caregivers. It offers wellness workshops and yoga and breathing and meditation. And so the LGBT Caregiver or LGBTQ Caregiver Center is another component of the Caregiver Wellness Collective. And so that's how we came together. And so, there are great organizations out there like SAGE that is focused a lot on LGBTQ aging. And there are a lot of LGBTQ resource centers or community centers around the country that have services for the aging and housing for seniors. But there's not as much in this caregiver space, whether it's family caregiver or if it's a partner caregiver or if they're professional caregivers. So around cultural competency, around issues that have to do with, if somebody's coming into the home and you have pictures up of your prior, maybe it was a gay man, he has a husband, right? Or had, maybe they're deceased. It's like people are doing what's called recloseting and de-gaying their homes when professionals come in. Or maybe there's even, a particular component of this, maybe we'll get into it so you can stop me, is talking about sort of like the additional stressors.
I want to break it down in a more compartmentalized way so that everybody can follow along. One of the things you just mentioned was decloseting and about like the professional judgment and stuff. And I'm always wondering, why were there not enough caregiver services for the LGBTQ community? Is it because of the stigmatization that is already against that community, or is it from professionals' lack of knowledge that there might be additional issues, or is it just, well, we only have so much money and we need to make cookie cutter services that are going to reach the largest audience possible? So unfortunately, not everything is going to work for that community. Like, I always am wondering, like, historically, why did it lead up to this community not having everything that they need? But let's talk about the unique issues for the LGBTQ community as they're aging. Let's pick up on that decloseting. It's interesting you're bringing that up. I have seen that also in my professional life, where when people call me on the phone asking for an evaluation, and let's say it's a gentleman calling and he says, an evaluation for my husband, I can just feel his energy on the other side pausing, like, what's she going to say? What's she going to do? Is she going to judge me? Is she going to come out? What's this going to be like? And even some of these clients talking to me about the feelings, they get a little bit different feelings when they're going in to visit their loved one and stuff, that they can still sense that it's kind of not okay for all the professionals that are working in those environments. And so they feel like they can't be themselves again.
Yeah, I might have not been, I might not have enunciated properly. It's recloseting.
That might be my fault. Recloseting.
No, well, I said two things really quickly. I said recloseting and de-gaying. So I think, right.
And I mixed them. That's my fault. I mixed them. Obviously, you're not decloseting, you're recloseting. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Because maybe they came out of the closet, so to speak. Maybe they, because if you think about it, the older generations, not that this doesn't happen anymore, but the older generations were living in such a different time before we had legalized same-sex marriage, before we had legalized, protections in employment, before we had, right? So they were living at a time when, people were being hospitalized and people were, right, like psychiatric hospitals. It was against the law. People were being arrested. They were being, rounded up and put in little wagons and carted off to the police department. So maybe some of those people never even, came out of the closet. But at least in their home, they could live their life, right? But now these professionals are coming in, just as an example, and, maybe they have, things up on the wall that are more homoerotic images, or maybe they have a bookshelf full of books that it's clear when you walk by it, even the people coming in to dust the shelves and vacuum the floors, right, are going to see these things. And so some people don't want others to see those things. They don't want to be judged. They don't want people to treat them poorly.
So that would then contribute to their isolation, because maybe they're not going to want to reach out in the same way.
Well, just one more piece of that would be also, I think, with a lot of the older generation, is there wasn't the same kind of understanding or encouragement or expectation or desire, perhaps in some cases, to have a family. So now we're dealing with a lot of LGBTQ people who are aging out, right, in the older boomer generations that don't have the natural sort of family caregiver structure, right? They don't have adult children. They don't have perhaps they have siblings, but maybe their siblings rejected them as a result, or maybe they have siblings who weren't outwardly rejecting, but they've never been friendly. And so it might not be a natural thing to like reach out to your brother or sister who may barely tolerated you, right?
You're
that doesn't
making,
feel
yeah.
person that you want to depend on. As you get older and older, you need to depend on people, rely on them.
You're making such an excellent point, Xander, and I see that in my own practice for the men and women who have been single or who have lived a life with a same-sex partner. When they come to me for services, they usually have much less of a biological family surrounding them. And a lot of the people that they identify as being their support system have been friends for 30 years or 40 years, or sometimes nieces and nephews because they themselves haven't had children, because that generation, that older generation, they didn't really do, same-sex adoptions back then and that kind of thing. So
yes.
I see that a lot in that older generation where they really only have each other, the partners, and there's not a lot of community around them.
And the partner, right? The partners, you're dealing with two individuals who might be of similar age cohort, and eventually that's not going to work. But when we talk about, let's say, like my generation, I'm Gen X, right? And so, and now I'm a caregiver. And so, especially if you think about it from the perspective of I'm a trans man, and so my father knew me most of my life as his daughter. And eventually, my understanding is at least that as his disease progresses, as the dementia progresses, that he may lose track that he has a son. He's going to wonder where his daughter is, right? He's going to be asking the people at the assisted living facility, where's my daughter? Well, there's no daughter on record. I'm an only child. So I have taken the liberty to disclose to the administrator, that I'm a trans man. So if my father starts asking for his daughter, please call me, right? Because I'm going to have to figure something out. And I have no idea what I'm going to figure out. I think sometimes he thinks I'm one of his brothers, so I might just go with that. But I'm not going to insist that he remember me as his son, right? He's going to, I don't know what I'm going to tell him about where his daughter is.
Wow,
so that's something I have to think about.
Yeah, those are some really interesting issues. And thank you so much for bringing that up, because it is true. Your father's journey that he's going through is one thing, and you as his caregiver is something. But now you're talking about as being in the LGBT community yourself and being trans, you don't have to, but you've chosen to basically break your own privacy in order to serve your father in the best way you can. And that's asking a lot of people, right? So I have great respect for you doing that. And I have a lot of respect for people who wouldn't be comfortable saying that. Like, look, I don't want to advertise who I once was and who I am now. I don't feel like telling people those details. I have a lot of respect for that too. That's a really interesting piece you're bringing up. And the additional piece of when your dad asks for his daughter, if he does, how do you explain that in a way that's not going to traumatize him, like, oh, she doesn't exist anymore, but I'm her dad. And I mean, how is he going to understand that? We can talk online about that if you want, and like go through it a bit and try and help you come up with a comfortable way of responding, but we can do that at another time. That's an excellent point.
Right. Because it's a very complicated concept. I mean, I'm living it. And I can barely describe it to other people, right? Being trans is something that if you asked 100 of us, what it means to be trans, you'll get 100 answers. It's not something that you could just neatly package up and say, here it is, right? We all come to it for different reasons in different ways at different times in our life. So I don't know how I would be able to explain it to my father. My first guess is that I just wouldn't do it. But it just feels there's something that just doesn't feel right to say to my father, your daughter is dead. Like, I don't like that concept. Like, I don't use terminology like dead naming because I find that highly offensive. My parents put a lot of time and attention into choosing a name for me. I did not die when I transitioned, and so I don't use that kind of language. So I don't want to package my experience to my father as that person is dead. I'm that person now, or I don't like. I thank you for suggesting that I could work with you offline, because I really don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know how it's going to come. I don't know how he's going to respond to whatever I say, which I can't control. So I'm going to let it go. I mean, I'm not going to worry. I'm not an anxious or worrisome person, so I'm not going to hold on to it. But I would like to at least have some kind of understanding of where I could at least start.
Yeah. And Xander, something that just popped in my mind too is that, and when you're doing these visits with your father, let's just hypothetically say he does start going to this place, where's my daughter, right? And maybe, okay, so you've told the director of the residence, but what about all of the other staff? So now we're talking about another issue that LGBTQ caregivers who are themselves in that community have to deal with and come to terms with and place of comfort, because the staff coming around might go, oh, your dad's asking for his daughter, and maybe they're not informed, and so now you have to reveal to somebody else, and what judgments are you going to get, and how are they going to look at you the next time you come? It's like an issue, a situation that's going to continue to like wrap itself around your life. And you seem extremely comfortable with where you're at, so I'm very happy to see that. But I imagine that there might be so many people who are not nearly at the place that you are, and how troublesome that might be for them. And will they not go visit their loved one because they just can't deal with all of those kinds of questions and potential judgments?
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate that my father has always been very supportive. He was supportive of me when I was, a lesbian. He's been very supportive of me as a trans man through my transition. But that's not always the case. So consider the fact that you have an LGBTQ identified person who, with a parent, that has dementia or Alzheimer's, and that parent was disapproving. That parent threw them out of the house. That parent disowned them. And all of a sudden now, because in large part, many of us in the LGBTQ community, we might not have children. Or if we do have children, we don't have maybe the same size of family, or we don't, right? Somehow we're expected to be the ones in the family that are the caregivers because we have more disposable income, or we have more accessibility, or we have more availability, right? And so sometimes it falls to us. In my case, I'm an only child, so that's the way it is. But in other cases, I mean, I've known people over the years who are part of LGBTQ community, and it fell on them. Right? Their siblings expected them to take on the bulk of the caregiving duties, even though the parent was hostile towards them, verbally abusive, maybe even physically abusive, and even worse, I think, sexually abusive. I mean, we can't discount that not all parents are beautiful and wonderful. Some of them do really horrible, terrible things. And then all of a sudden they have dementia, and they don't remember that they did those terrible things. And maybe the family doesn't believe that they did those terrible things, or maybe they're like, so what? Dad needs your help now, right? And so that I don't think that everybody's going to be able to rise to that occasion, nor do I think that they ought to rise to that occasion or be guilted or shamed into that. That's a decision everybody has to make. And I've been fortunate. My father's from Mexico. I'm first generation Mexican American. And so the last time I went to go visit my father, he greeted me in Spanish, right? And so now that's letting me know he's getting to a point, right, where he's maybe getting younger, right? As Spanish is his first language. And sometimes he thinks I'm one of his brothers. He was the youngest of 5. They're all dead now. He's the only living one. But if he thinks I'm his next oldest brother, then he doesn't remember that brother is dead, right?
Yeah.
And so it's already starting to happen. This maybe not necessarily know who I am, but I'm thankful that I don't have that negative past with my father clouding all of this, right? Because if you think the minority stress, right? So minorities have minority stress, but people different kinds of people who experience that are minorities, so to speak, they can go home to their family and they're just like the family in that way. The LGBTQ person has minority stress, and also might have family alienation.
Yeah, you've brought up so many points. I want to jump in a bit. First of all, I want to say your dad sounds amazing. And I'm so wonderful that he's been supportive of you throughout your life. And I understand if he's greeting you in Spanish and thinking you're his brother, your preoccupation is now rising of what am I going to say when he says, where's my daughter? Because he's going backwards in time. So I get where you're coming from that. But I want to talk a bit about some of the isolation that the different caregivers may experience, because there's like two different levels that we're talking about here. We're talking about the experience of the LGBTQ person who's aging, and that individual person and the experience he or she or they may have in their life. And then we're also talking about the caregiver and how that contributes, if that caregiver, the relationship. I mean, there's so many layers here. But one thing that you brought up, Xander, which I think is actually universal, is the assumption that one particular person in the family should become the primary caregiver. So now you're talking about the reasons why it might be someone in the LGBTQ community. Maybe they're less likely to have children. Maybe they have more disposable income, which is a stereotype, may or may not be true, but they have more time. They don't have as many work hours. They don't have this to balance. And so therefore it should be that person. But I will tell you that that's pretty universal in any family, whether or not there's an LGBTQ person, because it's who has the least amount of kids. Well, my sister only has 3 and I have 4. Therefore she has more time than me, like supposedly. By the way, I don't have that many kids. That was just like a hypothetical. Or, a lot, I work for myself. So sometimes the assumption would be, well, then I have more time to make calls because I'm working out of my home. But working out of your home doesn't mean you don't have the same full-time responsibilities. Just because I'm sitting with my dog at my feet doesn't mean I still have to, have things that I'm supposed to be doing. So there's a lot of these assumptions that happen in families, and it's a very difficult road to navigate, because you want to do everything you can for your parent, but you also want to share the load with your siblings as much as possible. And I'm finding that that's a pretty universal theme that you're bringing up.
Yeah, I mean, if we take it into like that broader context, and we focus on how the LGBTQ issues might be part of this, intersect with this, is think about, typically it's also the one that's closest in proximity.
Yep.
To the person who needs the care. Well, if you think about it in the way of maybe the LGBTQ person who's part of the family didn't get away, right? Because maybe they had more hardships, maybe they went through more difficult things, and therefore they didn't have the same opportunities or access to those opportunities, or the whereabouts to even know how to access those, right? And so they didn't go off to college, they didn't go off, right? They didn't get married and move to another state where their spouse's family is to raise the kids by their cousins, right? So there's reasons why sometimes, many positive reasons why people stay close to home, but sometimes there's also these negative reasons or just necessity, which is, well, I didn't have the means, I didn't have the opportunity, so I'm sort of stuck here, right? It doesn't feel like I stayed close to home. I got stuck, or I got left behind. My siblings just went off to college, but I was having so much trouble with lack of family acceptance that I was misbehaving in school, and then I just dropped out, and I could never crawl my way back out of that, right? That's the story for some people. I mean, not for me. I was able to crawl myself out of that, and I got into the military, and that really helped, but that's not what everybody's going to be able to do. And so
it's true. And a lot of caregivers that are close feel like it's falling on them because geographically they're close and they got stuck in that situation. And the stuck feeling can be from a lot of different issues. What you're highlighting is that there could be the additional layer of that person struggling so much when they were younger and not being afforded the same opportunities because their family imposed limitations on them, or just internally they were struggling so much they didn't have the confidence or security to be able to explore other kind of options. So it's kind of like a lot of these issues you're bringing up are universal caregiver issues, but then there's this additional layer of the LGBTQ experience and how that can impact the way in which somebody starts their life, navigates their life, evolves throughout their life, and then how that in turn impacts the way they're going to care for other people.
Absolutely. I mean, especially if we think about bringing professional, right, care providers, home health agencies, right? They're going to be sending people into the home. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of consistency around that, right? They'll send like a different person every day. And it's like, that's terrible for people with dementia in particular. And they, they might, they're there sometimes just for socialization purposes, right? So there's no isolation. And so now they're engaging them in conversation about, oh, did you have a wife? Where are your children? And so they might be engaging them in a conversation that it doesn't match the identity of the person that they're talking to. But they might not recall that, right? It's maybe that's how it's sort of somewhat of the blessing and curse of dementia is, you don't know when people are getting it wrong because you're like, sure, I guess I had a wife and kids, I guess, I don't really know how dementia works.
There's this struggle too, I find, when this happens, when the person who has dementia is forgetting some incredibly significant portions of their life, like, no, I never had a wife, I was married to a man. Like, that's pretty significant, right? And what does the caregiver do about that? Do we remind, do we educate the staff person? Do we try to change the story back to what the reality was? And I find this is kind of, it's off topic, but not when it comes to nutrition, because I find that seniors, when they, let's say, were a vegetarian their whole life, and then now they're in a residence and they're just being served steak and they're eating it because they have dementia. They have no recollection that they didn't eat meat before in their life, and now they're just eating it. And I hear caregivers struggling. What do I do? Do I go back and change the story back to what it was for my mom when she was a vegetarian? Do I tell the staff that? Do I bother with that and then create issues for her because she's saying, why don't I get to eat what that person has on their plate? Or do I just go to the current reality of where they are now and say, you know what, my mom's no longer a vegetarian. So you know what, my dad, I guess, was never married to a man, and that story just, we don't bring it up again. It's an interesting dilemma for caregivers in general to have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes caregivers, whether they're family or partners or professionals, they're going to want to take people out, right, out of the home. Whether it's the family home or the nursing home, they're going to want to take them out into the community. Maybe just let's go get some tea, or maybe let's take a walk around the park or something. And I think about things like with my father. It's like when I put him in the car with me, I'm like, I'm going to put on the 50s channel on my Sirius XM radio station because maybe that's the music he'll be able to relate to and not be so anxious about being in the car, which doesn't happen very often. Maybe I'll take him to eat at a restaurant where there's foods that he remembers eating younger in his life, right? So I think in the LGBTQ context, it's like, maybe I can, I would take my loved one to a part of town that has like maybe the rainbow flags up in the neighborhood, or maybe into that coffee house that, is either playing music or has art up, or, that would be recognizable, even if it's subconsciously. There might be something that resonates without really knowing that it's resonating, just a comfortability. I don't know. I mean, but I would at least try it. I would try things like that. And not make a big deal out of it. Like, let's go to the gay coffee house. You know what I mean? Like,
no, but you're bringing up an excellent point. And I think as caregivers, what you're highlighting in any context, LGBTQ or not, is we have to keep trying different things to see what's going to work. And there's no answer that's going to work for every single person. And we have to be willing to be flexible and open to ideas and just keep trying stuff. And it might work on a Monday and then it doesn't work Tuesday, but it works again the following Thursday. Like we just don't know, and we have to just keep trying.
I'm trying to find Spanish speaking people that I asked last time I was visiting my father, I asked one of the staff members if there were any residents that were Spanish speaking and if they could make arrangements to have my father, just sort of casually bump into them and they could greet him in Spanish. Because if he's addressing me, first off, when I walk up and say, hi, Dad, I'm like, should I change that now? Is it Poppy again? Right? Like, do I need to start changing the way I talk?
Well, I think if you start with, I mean, we're going more into now a clinical talk, but I think you start where he's at. So if he says, you know, whatever, hola hijo, and then you just go, hello papi, and then you begin, or he says, hello, sir, and you say, hello, sir, back, or whatever, you just kind of meet him where he's at and begin. But I would think in Florida, because you're in Florida, there should be a Spanish speaking community. And I'm thinking, maybe in a local church. I don't know what religion your father is, but maybe there's no, because I was thinking just that there might be some volunteers who are Spanish speaking in a local church that might be able to volunteer.
Yeah, he's in Jacksonville. Jacksonville is not the more, you know, Latin place.
Okay.
You know, he left the Catholic Church at age 8. And I don't think he's gone that far back.
Okay. So Xander, we're kind of running out of time. We're already at 40 minutes, and which is even longer than I normally go. So I want to get to your caregiving center that you came up with. It's called the LGBTQ Caregiver Center. So talk to me about what it is and what kind of assistance you can get for people.
Sure. Can I just say one quick thing and then I'll move on to that? What I want to say is about isolation is the isolation that caregivers also experience. And that I can tell you when I was going to caregiver groups or interacting with people who were other caregivers, they were all women. And I didn't sort of have a rapport with them. They were always saying to me, oh, how nice of you to check in on your father. They didn't treat me like a caregiver. I was just some son who, but I recently found a group that's all men who are caregivers for their wives or their mothers or their fathers with dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's been a true blessing. I'm so appreciative that a group like that exists here in the Orlando, Florida area and meets in person once a month. So I just want to put a plug for, we can often feel isolated because our family, our friends, they don't understand what we're going through. They just don't. And we become downers in some respect. And then they stop inviting us over because, you know, it takes a toll on us. So connect in with other caregivers.
Thank you, Xander, for pointing out too that we need to, even with amongst ourselves as caregivers, not be judgmental of another caregiver who might be a different gender than us. You know, like just because he's a male doesn't mean he's not going through the same struggles as we are. So we have to, I thank you for bringing that up. So now talk to me about the LGBTQ Caregiver Center. So the
LGBTQ Caregiver Center is a virtual or digital resource. And right now we have a lot of goals because we're working through the process of becoming a 501c3 at that larger level, right? At the Caregiver Wellness Collective level. And then the LGBTQ Caregiver Center will fall underneath that. And so we're working towards getting the official nonprofit status. And we have a website up, lgbtqcaregiver.org, I believe. Sorry, that off the top of my head, I'm
send it to me and I'll put it in the comments.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not as technologically savvy.
No problem.
So I don't hold on to that kind of information. And then, so on our website currently, we have a request and a form that people can fill out who are caregivers or have been caregivers. So they're LGBTQ identified, or they're caring for somebody or they're caring for somebody who's a member of the community. We're collecting stories from people, written stories, and then we're going to do video interviews with people. Mm-hmm. We want to be able to connect caregivers with each other. We have the Yoga for Caregivers wellness resources. We also have a call out for a university-based study on LGBT caregiving. They're looking at adapting a dementia caregiver training model to be, they're adapting it to be more LGBTQ culturally competent or friendly. So they're looking for more participants. I went through that as a participant myself. I got a lot of value from it, especially in ways that I can interact with my father that is, you know, easier on me and easier on him, you know, emotionally. We're also, so we're hoping to collect, be sort of like a clearinghouse for research studies published and ongoing. We're also in the process just now of putting together a very long list of resources available across the country that we're going to put into a directory. so that people can connect with other caregivers, caregiver support services, professional caregiving services that have an LGBT sort of awareness. So I mentioned earlier that SAGE, right? SAGE is an organization that focuses on LGBTQ aging. Well, they have a training program where they do basically like safe zone training, like they do in colleges. They do that skilled nursing facilities, nursing homes, right? So sort of connecting all of these resources together. There's a broad network across the country of LGBTQ specific retirement communities and skilled nursing facilities where people can feel comfortable. People have been especially trained. So that's really the goal, is to connect caregivers with each other, connect caregivers with resources, and then connect us with research and research with us.
Amazing.
Right? And, yeah. So
That's
it's in its
amazing,
infancy, but it's really the only thing of its kind. And we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to take all that is already available and make it a one-stop shop, so that caregivers, we don't have a lot of time in our schedules to go out looking for all of these materials, because people are like, it's already out there on the internet. It's like, oh, because I just have all this extra time. Right. In dementia circles, what people don't, outside of dementia circles, people don't realize that, every 24 hours is basically 36 hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the dementia person can't keep track of time.
Yeah.
And so 24 hours is an exhausting period of time for the caregiver.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Xander, so much. And send me the link and I'll put it in the comments. And also to let everybody know that Xander has Key Consulting, where he does peer consultation, organizational consultation, gender transition coaching, conflict resolution, diversity training, and he can also deliver keynote. Thank you so much, Xander, so much for coming on and having this discussion with me. There are a lot of things that we never got to or didn't get to explore further. So maybe you and I, again, can talk offline and find a narrower topic to address, because I think we went in kind of broad, and now I realize we got a lot more to talk about and I'd like to stick to a more narrow topic. So we'll talk offline, but thanks so much, Xander.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome, and stay online. I'm going to end the broadcast, but stay online.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Hang on, I'm trying to end it.